Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Riedel, the Senior Marketing Manager at RDX and the webinar's organizer today. I'd like to welcome you to our presentation, Microsoft Business Intelligence Offerings. RDX's Senior Business Intelligence and Data Warehousing Manager, Jeremy Frye, will provide an overview of the Microsoft product suite in addition to the advantages of using Microsoft BI products both on-premises and in Azure. He'll then provide a Power BI demo that explains how Power BI integrates with SSIS, SSAS, and SSRS, and how attendees can use it to capture, model, transform, and analyze key business metrics. To prevent background noise, all attendees will be muted throughout the presentation, but if you have a question during the webinar, you can submit it through the questions panel on your GoToWebinar dashboard. I will bundle all questions up and address them during our Q&A session at the end of the presentation. All attendees will also be receiving a copy of the recording along with the webinar slides after the presentation concludes. So without further delay, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Jeremy.
Great. Well, first off, I want to thank everybody for attending today. And I want to say good afternoon if you are on East Coast time or if you are Central time. I know it's, if you're Mountain time or Pacific time, you're a few hours back. So good morning to you. And, I know we're approaching afternoon there. So thank you as well. And I hope that we can provide some helpful insight to you today on the business intelligence suite and the different tool sets around that suite, both on-premise and Azure, and then really dive into Power BI here today. And we'll give you an opportunity at the end to ask some questions as well. And hopefully this will be insightful in helping you maybe choose SQL Server or choose to expand your tool sets, and then how RDX can potentially help you. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm sure most of you on the call here are a current RDX client. And so if you are, you probably understand the matrix of how RDX works. We are 24/7, support for you. We have different tiers and levels of support. Many of you probably have our administrative and maintenance services. So you probably talk to your primary and secondary DBAs on a pretty often basis, or maybe someone from the database operations center as well. But we have, 700 plus contracts are supported through RDX daily. We have a ton of different clients in all different types of industries. So we have a great deal of experience dealing with data and dealing with infrastructures and environments across a multitude of IT platforms and situations. And so what we need to, focus on is where we're going with BI and the different mechanisms of BI that are being introduced in the SQL Server platform, as well as, agnostic cloud environments as well. And so what we have is, we have 200 plus DBAs in different platforms. We have SQL Server DBAs, DB2, Oracle, Oracle Apps, Postgres, Mongo, MySQL, just to name the major platforms. And we support tens of thousands of servers that we monitor. As I mentioned, this is just kind of a recap slide of the different platforms that we support. We also have Windows OS. I don't want to omit that as well. And, they handle a lot of SharePoint. We have SharePoint administrators as well. We also have Unix, Linux administrators. So hopefully that might be of help to, anyone on a call who maybe want to expand services with RDX as well. We're also starting to get into cloud platform. We do support a lot of Azure SQL database as a service, as well as some different IaaS, infrastructure as a service, and platform as a service solutions as well within Microsoft and Amazon. So what we're going to be focusing on today's webinar is the on-premise tools of the SQL Server BI tool stack, mostly just giving you some valuable information on how those are used in different types of business intelligence environments around the SQL Server database engine. That includes integration services, analysis services, and reporting services. Those are your traditional BI tools. And then we'll talk a little bit about Azure BI and software as a service, and then mostly focusing that on Power BI. Here, from RDX's standpoint, and utilizing SQL Server and Microsoft Business Intelligence, when you talk about an on-premise implementation of analysis services or integration services or reporting services, if you have a database engine license, those come free of charge. So you have a low cost, initial entry point, and you have a robust product suite that you can use to do everything from an enterprise data warehouse to a smaller segmented departmentalized data marts, all the way up to just, integration of, disparate data sources from different systems that you may have. And then we also manage analysis services, which is a semantic model as well that sits on top of your data that allows it to perform in, a more adequate environment for analysis. The compatibility of it can go across multiple RDMSs, different data stores. There's a lot of connectivity points to flat files and SharePoint and different database systems. So it's tightly integrated. And then we support all of this under the hood of RDX. We have a multitude of teams, including a business intelligence architecture team, as well as a DevOps business intelligence development team. And with the conjunctions of those two teams, we also work hand in hand with administrative teams as well, so we can provide full-fledged solution under the hood of RDX. To kind of step a little bit into integration services, it's really an ETL tool, stands for extract, transform, and load. So you can have data in a lot of different places. You can have custom applications in data entry. You can have flat files that individuals use for reporting. You can have ERP systems, all kind of different types of systems I'm sure you have integrated in your environments. What integration services allows you to do is allows you to take those data sources, make those connections, bring that data into one centralized place, and then conform that data or transform it to meet certain business standards, which are then fed into an analytical processing engine, such as like analysis services. So not to kind of bore you with the really detailed technological examples of that, but if you need to do aggregations or you need to merge that data based upon unique IDs and keys, you have the ability to do that within integration services. And then you can automate the control flow of that and the scheduling of that. So if you have an ETL process that you need to transform data every night, you can actually schedule that using SQL Server agent in a SQL Server database engine to run that on a nightly schedule. Or I know we've built processes for individuals to actually scrape, and I'll actually give you an example of how we use a scraping technology to bring data into Power BI using integration services later. But as of now, we actually have a scrape that can run every hour, every couple of minutes, depending on if data is available. So it's extremely capable of handling a multitude of different ETL types of solutions. Kind of stepping into Azure, we're starting to see a big shift now in software as a service. So the equivalent to SQL Server integration services is a tool called Azure Data Factory. Azure Data Factory when it first came out, there's two versions of it. There's a version 1 and a version 2. Version 1, it's all built on JSON in the back end. We do have a lot of knowledge on integrating JSON with integration services. We've actually done a project for one of our clients to parse JSON data out of their ticketing system using SSIS. Well, JSON's become, a world, wide platform or solution for storing data at the application level. So what Azure Data Factory is built on JSON. The version 1, you would have to know JSON coding. Version 2 is more of a GUI implementation of Azure Data Factory. So it works similar to SSIS. At first it was only utilized as an ELT tool, so extract, load, more for like bigger dumps and bulk loading, and then you would run your scripts in T-SQL or Python or SCADA or whatever language you would like against the database level to actually transform that and push it somewhere else. But Azure does a very good job, or Microsoft, I should say, does a very good job of providing regular updates. Their dev team is awesome. I know some individuals who are on their development teams in the different platforms, and they release updates, quite often. So there's been a ton of improvements to Azure Data Factory, including data flows. So on the right-hand side here, we have everything in an Azure Data Factory is considered a activity. So you have, your data sets, which are activities, called linked services. So the linked services are essentially your connection points to your different servers. Your pipeline is your control flow. So your pipeline is the things that are happening from your different linked services, so your source to your destination. And then your data flow is where you're doing your actual transformation. So you can conditionally split data based upon conditions. You can actually filter data. You can derive, almost like if you're familiar with T-SQL, like a case statement, for example. You can do lookup and joins. So it has some of the same similar transformation types of tasks or activities in a data flow, same as SSIS. So what we have here, before I have some things kind of blurred out. So what we have here is almost a traditional or a new software as a service modern data warehouse implementation. So you have structured and unstructured data. You use Azure Data Factory to ingest that data, and then you can load it to blob storage or Azure Data Lake. And then from the data lake standpoint, you can go directly into Azure SQL Data Warehouse and then Azure Analysis Services, and then feed that into Power BI. You can also utilize a tool called Azure Databricks to actually do machine learning, where you can take that data and you can create algorithmic models to do predictive analysis. And then you can actually query out of that, and you can actually use in Power BI Databricks as a source to actually go straight into Power BI visualizations with. But then you can also utilize parallel processing engine of Azure SQL Data Warehouse and analysis services to feed from Azure Databricks, or to come directly from your blob storage of your load to report off of in Power BI as well. Jumping into analysis services, as I mentioned, we've talked about two ETL tools, one in a cloud environment and then one in an on-premise SQL Server implementation. So then we talked about going into Azure Analysis Services or SQL Server Analysis Services. So SQL Server Analysis, again, is another on-premise implementation, even though they do have Azure Analysis Services, which is a platform as a service within Azure. What we currently, do from this standpoint is you take your data and you pull it from all your disparate data sources. You transform that according to the requirements that you need out of the business and what questions you want to answer, and then you build that into what's called a denormalized database. What you might have heard it as a star schema or snowflake schema. So basically, it's a lot of flat tables and it's less relational, because what it does is it allows for the semantic layer analysis services to compress that data a lot easier, because it stores it into like a tabular model. And so what that looks like is, without getting too technical underneath the hood, it uses an X velocity engine, which basically compresses that data and puts it in columnar storage. And so it's similar to like a columnar index at the SQL Server level. I've seen you get about 10 times the compression of just stored in your regular database at the semantic model. So it's easier to process, it's faster to process, and it's easier to access millions and millions of rows of data, or gigabytes or terabytes or even petabytes worth of data a lot quicker than just running T-SQL aggregate statements that have to scan a lot of tables. So that's kind of a 50,000-foot overview of, how you would analyze the difference between a analytical processing engine for doing analytics versus your traditional transactional system that you might have feeding your application. Now, this can get pretty confusing from the Azure analysis standpoint, and that's just, it really is, what you can get from this is that you can integrate Azure Analysis Services with SQL Server in a lot of different ways. So Azure Data Factory actually has an integration runtime that you can actually run an SSIS package that you might have had. So if you have a big SSIS implementation on premise that you have and it's feeding your current data warehouse, and you wanted to do like a lift and shift into Azure, you can actually run your integration services packages in Azure and actually call them from a data factory if you need to. You can even from there go into blob storage or go straight to a database, and then you can feed that again into SQL Data Warehouse, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, and analysis services. And then the analysis services in Azure is a fully managed server. So when you talk about building a star schema or a snowflake schema, that's the database layer of it, and the semantic model is on top of that. So it's the logical layer. That acts the same exact way as analysis services on premise. The big benefit that you get from using Azure analysis services is if your data is already in the cloud, you can scale up and scale down fairly quickly. So, obviously with the upfront cost of building some sort of analytical engine of a server, for example, if you're trying to build a data warehouse, you might say, well, what kind of server resources may I need, memory, CPU, etc. Well, with Azure Analysis Services, that's fully managed in Azure for you. And so if you feel you're not getting the performance out of your design, you can scale that up and scale that down whenever you need to save on cost. So it just allows a little bit more flexibility, which is, typically what the cloud environment is for. Going on to SQL Server reporting services. A lot of people use this. It's mostly used for paginated reporting. There's been a big, for a while, SQL Server reporting services did not get a lot of love. There were not a lot of updates for a period of years. And then in 2016, they completely revamped it and pushed it up to HTML5, which has a lot better visualizations. So the graphics and everything are a lot better. And then they actually bought a company called DataZen, which you can actually do mobile reporting out of as well. It's called something a little different now, which I'll get into a little later, but reporting services is very capable. What you can also do in reporting services now is you can actually embed KPIs in different, you can pin visualizations from Power BI as well, but you have to actually have a Power BI implementation, and then you can register your reporting services with that. Microsoft has also expanded into an on-premise Power BI, which I'll get into later as well, where you don't actually need SQL Server reporting services, because if you have Power BI reporting services, then you also have the capability of deploying your Power BI reports as well as your paginated SSRS reports in Power BI report server as well. So the architecture, behind it, on a high level, pretty much looks like this. So if you understand database architecture, you have your report server and report server TempDB databases. When you look at your SQL Server Management Studio on the back end of managing your databases, you will see the databases that everything is stored in for SSRS. And then what happens is you have different data sources from all different places, which are considered data sets. Your data sets, basically connect. You can connect to web APIs. You can use an ODBC connection. You can use an OLADB connection, ADO.NET. You can connect to a link server, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very scalable when it comes to hitting a lot of different types of data sources. And you typically will design that in either Visual Studio. And if you have a full implementation of Visual Studio, that's great. But you can also download a free version of, it's a streamlined version of Visual Studio called SQL Server Data Tools. And it's free, and it has the templates in it for SSIS development, for SSRS development, and for developing your SSAS semantic layer. You can also have what's called Report Builder. Report Builder is, so when you access your report server or your reports, you have to hit a web browser. It's all in a web browser that's on-prem to you. So if you're outside of the domain, you can't actually connect to it unless you introduce some security concerns, which I don't recommend. I have seen people do that, and we've, actually helped implementate that, but we put a disclaimer out that, you can have you have to allow anonymous connection to your server, basically. So within that web browser, you can actually install an add-on component called Report Builder, which will allow you to actually develop a report right there at the URL level, and not need a separate tool for that. Mobile Publisher is the new free download to actually create the report for mobile viewing, and that's what was initially DataZen. And then you can also obviously render your reporting as an HTML output, or you can actually output it as an Excel spreadsheet. You even with the newer versions of SQL have the capability to export it as a PowerPoint. You can actually download it to a share. You can send an email that has an attachment. So there's a lot of capabilities with SQL Server reporting services. Now kind of tapping into the meat of, what we want to talk about today is Power BI. So Power BI, as we mentioned, one of the things that led a lot of non-developers away from SSRS, if you don't have the staff, it does require a lot of knowledge and insight into coding and into building the proper paginated reports. Where Microsoft BI came in is Microsoft wanted to compete with Tableau and ClickView, ClickSense, and some of those types of self-service reporting. So they developed a tool of their own that allows a lot of drag and drop reporting. Now you can still get very intricate with development, and there's definitely some things to consider when you have end users building reports, and there's a lot of different deployment strategies you can utilize. But what they wanted is they wanted to provide a tool that was easy to use and extremely powerful, and they wanted it to be able to have a lot of easy connectivity between on-prem and, in the cloud atmosphere as well, without, with little configuration or light management. And so that's really what this diagram is for, is just to kind of show you the different capabilities. You'll see direct query in here. Direct query, you need a Power BI gateway. So what that means is if you need to connect and ingest data into your Power BI and you don't want to refresh it or store it in the memory, you can actually use the queries that hit the raw backend database, but you need a Power BI gateway. So it's just a gateway to talk to your on-premise information. So the orange represents, the capabilities that you can direct data from an on-premise using direct query. You have refresh data connections, you have data connections in workflow. So these are just different capabilities that you can use with Power BI for connecting to different environments. As I mentioned, I kind of got ahead of myself and started talking about the on-premise data gateway here. But the on-premise data gateway, as I mentioned, you can do more real-time reporting. And with Power BI, when you actually say connect to a flat file or connect to a database or connect to whatever source you need to, what you initially do by default is you're taking all of that data that you're connecting to, whether if that's a specific query or a set of tables, and you're importing that into memory, where you refresh it on an interval to go back out to your source system and then ingest new data and store it in the memory. That is extremely fast because it's stored in the memory and you're not using row level, or you're not using user security to go out to the database and issue a query every time against cold cache. It's just automatically in memory, and you're just basically determining how you want to slice and dice and view that data. Well, a lot of times you might have a capability where you need to satisfy real-time reporting. So if you have a Power BI report that refreshes, let's just say every hour, maybe there was a big change and you need to actually see your data in real time, and you want to actually control level of security from the user standpoint, you can actually have your Power BI gateway, and when data changes at your source, then as soon as someone drags and drops, it'll just basically issue a query against that raw data, so nothing's actually cached there. Power BI has made some new improvements, and again, I might be getting ahead of myself here because we may cover this in another slide, so I can just continue to move forward. But you can actually do a hybrid implementation in Power BI now. Before, you either had to choose one capability or the other. You either had to import into memory or you had to do direct query. Now you can actually choose different data sets to do different things. So maybe you build this huge dashboard in Power BI that facets all different pieces of your business, and some of it needs to be real time, and some of it doesn't matter if it's real time because it's historical, that you need to, you may choose to cache that historical data because it doesn't change. But more real time graphics that need to show things updating more quickly, you might actually implement a more direct query model in that same exact Power BI report. So that's just one example of how Microsoft is making improvements in Power BI. Power BI dashboards and reports. So there's two different, when you go to Power BI, not talking Power BI report server, which is on-prem, Power BI in the cloud, it basically, you can do a report, which is multi-page. You have graphical displays, you have single or multiple data sources, and then you can basically filter, slice, etc., and everything is controlled on that one page. You can actually establish page level visualizations and filters and different things, right? Now, a dashboard is one page, but a dashboard, you can have the capability of taking, let's just say you had 5 Power BI reports. You can take one visualization from each of those reports and pin them to create one dashboard. So you can actually provide insights to your report users to be able to see data from 5 different reports in one place without actually opening up each report or navigating that way. So that's really the biggest thing that you see different between a dashboard and a report. And then you can actually click on a pinned dashboard item, and it will take you down to the specific report. So then you have the capability to drill down and drill through from that standpoint. So this is what I was talking about on Power BI Report Server. It is an on-premise implementation. There's 2 caveats to this. It works almost the same way as the SQL Server reporting services, where it does have a report server and a report server temp-DB that houses everything that it's deployed, you deploy your reports to and your data sets to. You can actually hit it from your same, it creates the same type of a URL that SQL Server reporting services does. So you just type that into your local browser, etc. You have the capability the same way with reporting services to connect to many different sources. You can deploy tabular reports, paginated tabular reports all the way up to Power BI dashboards as well. Now there's 2 caveats to this though. One is the licensing that's needed. So Power BI Report Server either comes with the licensing of Power BI Premium. Power BI Premium is So a Power BI Pro license, which gives you full capabilities to do Power BI development, is about $10 a month. Power BI Premium is backed by capacity, and it's essentially for saying if you have 3,000 report users, if you're an extremely large company, you would save money by going with Power BI Premium, because you're not licensing each individual user, but you're licensing up to a certain amount of users. And then you're backed by premium capacity, which means you have your own dedicated hardware for PowerBI.com as a service. And then so you have the capability to use Power BI Report Server within that license model. The other way you can use Power BI Report Server is if you have software assurance licensing with your SQL Server Enterprise Edition, then you get it that way as well. Typically, most people will choose to do it that way because they may not be allowed, either for PCI or compliance reasons, to actually go to migrate to PowerBI.com, the cloud version of Power BI. So they may want to keep everything on-prem but still utilize Power BI. Now, of course, we have to talk about limitations. I want to make sure I give the proper information here for any individual who may be looking at what implementation might be right for your environment here. So really the biggest thing, and I won't read line by line here, but the biggest thing here to take into consideration is how much it's the update and release cycle. So Power BI has a rapid release cycle and a modern life cycle, but it's maybe updated, so different features are maybe updated once a quarter, or every so often, maybe with like SQL Server reporting services is. But PowerBI.com has a new release every month. So if you download Power BI Desktop, which is free, and it's the development tool for Power BI, every month, typically anywhere between the 10th or 11th of the month, you might see, a new update available so you can access different features. So that's really the biggest thing. Obviously, if you want to, with Power BI Report Server, you cannot do dashboards as well, because that is only a PowerBI.com feature. You cannot do applications, which I'll get into a little bit later. Applications are essentially canned data sets with reports tied to them. So if you have multiple developers, you can actually utilize you can utilize the same data sets and have data governance behind that. So that's just a few things about Power BI Report Server and the limitations with it. Here's some fun facts, if anyone wants to take a screenshot, I'll just kind of touch, very quickly a couple of these. I don't want to read them all, but as I mentioned, it's $9.99 a month for the online service. You can download Power BI Desktop, and that's Power BI Pro for $9.99 a month. Content packs have been replaced with apps, but it's the same concept. It's an automated, it's basically a a container that has data sets pre-built in it. There's some other things in here. We talk about the gateway. We talk about some integration. It has strong integration with analysis services and SSIS. A lot of people, use SSIS to conform their data into their data warehouse and then feed that into Power BI. SSAS obviously can be a source. So if you have a data warehouse built in SSAS, you can actually connect to it through Power BI. So there's a lot of different capabilities, and these are just some highlighted points here. I'm going to, skip through some of these slides. I'll kind of briefly touch them because in the demo, you'll get to see some of this. But when you actually open up Power BI, you will get this. So on the left-hand side, your Discover Content, your Organization and Services is where you can connect to the apps either that your developers have built for report developers, so they don't have to worry about, making connections and conforming data. They can just worry about creating the visualizations they need. And then there's services, so you can actually choose apps from online services. So there's like online services like Salesforce and GitHub and Google Analytics, etc. So if you use any of that information, you can actually connect to content packs or apps that are published by those service providers as well. On the right-hand side, this is for if you need to connect the data from a flat file or from an actual database, and you need to make that connection and issue that query or select that table or that file from a specific location. Here's an example of the apps. So this is, if you look at the left-hand side here, at the top, it says apps. These are a couple examples of apps that are put out by third-party vendors that you could utilize if you needed it. Under My Organization at the top, those would be apps that your business analysts used to create apps that other end users could use to create their own reports. Here, the content packs also have default dashboards. So you can actually use these if you weren't really sure how to get started and what visualizations to use. You can actually use these and then change them to your implementation as well. So if you use GitHub and have a GitHub repository, you can choose GitHub, use their dashboard, and then make a change to the connection to your GitHub repository, and then basically utilize their template. Here is when you're in Power BI Desktop. This is just the interface of what it looks like when you select file and then get data. Here's the different, avenues and organization of tiers of types of data that you can connect to. There's a section in Power BI where you can do data modeling. So you can actually, it's almost like if you think about if you use Visio or Embarcadero or like some sort of ERD diagramming tool, it kind of works the same way. So the data that you import or ingest into Power BI, you can actually make connections and transformations as well with this. Now, the transformations I'll get to, which are right here, actually on the back side of this, the back end of this, use Power Query or M code. So you don't necessarily have to be an M code developer. If you just know what kind of functionality you need to do from a transformation standpoint, all this probably looks pretty familiar if you're a business analyst or report developer of some sort, or even a DBA or business intelligence analyst. This will look familiar. So you can actually transform your data within the model as well. Here's the visualization design. So when you start to actually ingest your data and you have it, then here's where you would choose the tables and the fields that you need and the visualization that you want to use, and then how you would categorize the different things to actually show within that visualization. Again, I'll show some examples. I have a bunch of robust examples of Power BI reports that we'll get into. Some advanced features are bookmarks. So I know a lot of the times Microsoft is really good with this, because if you ever follow the Power BI community, they pose a lot of questions, and you can actually sign up and vote for different features and functionalities if you see something that you think would be useful. And if it has a bunch of votes, the development team will actually take it into consideration and potentially look forward to releasing that kind of a a design strategy or that a tool set or feature or functionality. So with a bookmark, if I had, a visualization like this, but I wanted on a click of a button to change this visualization to something else, I can basically stack all of my visualizations here and then add a bookmark and choose what I want to show and hide based upon a click of a button or some sort of an action. So I'll show you that as well. I have a demonstration behind that. And I want to make sure I have time to go through the demo portion of this. So here is, how you publish the Power BI. So if you kind of see, up top, you can just, when you click publish, it will ask you to log in to powerbi.com with your, typically it's your Microsoft Office 365 login that's tied to your domain. And you can then, deploy it to your workspace, or you can set up other workspaces, et cetera, to do that for organization purposes. It's extremely easy to deploy Power BI reports. There's also optimization for phones and tablets. And so when you're designing your surface of your Power BI report, there's a little button that you can actually click to say, show me, a phone. Show me the real estate of a phone and what that looks like, or a tablet, and you can customize visualizations for that kind of a view and not just a desktop view. Because as we know, sometimes this happens with websites. Websites always have a mobile view and then a desktop view. So you might create something in a desktop view and then try to view it on your mobile, and you might have to scroll around, or something may be cut off, or you might get a carriage return that kind of throws your formatting off. So Power BI gives you the capability to be able to move your visualizations around and make sure they're compatible with the phone and show appropriately the way you would like to see it. Here's workspaces. So one thing that I would highly recommend against is deploying anything to your personal workspace. And if you are a IT manager or an executive, this is extremely important. I had a client come to me. They had one report Power BI developer who deployed everything to their own workspace. And what ended up happening is when that person left the company, they couldn't access any of those reports because their login and everything got shut off. So, and essentially you can create app workspaces where you can give, a multitude of people visualization into it and control, so you can manage who has access to what, depending on the different app workspaces. So if one person leaves, then, that doesn't mean that, hey, you need to try to figure out how to hack into that person's account who's left in order to access all of the reports that they created. So this is, you don't need Power BI Desktop to create reports. You can actually go into powerbi.com. It looks fairly similar. And this is just showing a visualization of that as well. This is how you create a dashboard. So when you actually go to a report, all you do is click pin to dashboard, and you can select an existing dashboard, and it's that easy. And then once you click on that dashboard, so if you see the list of dashboards there, I can click on that dashboard, and then I can move this pinned visualization around or however I want. It's extremely easy to actually build a dashboard. Power BI also has Q&A. So if you don't know what you want to do with your data, or what kind of question you might want to ask of your data, you can actually do a Q&A where you can, select this little button and you can type in a question that says, show the average products that were sold in 2017, in this state, right? And what it'll do is it'll actually create a visualization for you, and it will filter it down to that to show you that. And that might give you some good examples of, where you might want to start in creating certain reports. The Power BI service Quick Insights. I haven't used this functionality much, but the Quick Insights is also similar, where it will do predictions and different things for you to give you insights on the data that you're selecting. And this is just how to do it from the desktop. So you do have the capability to do it in the desktop or to do it in a Power BI service. You can embed we get a lot of requests or at least questions on, if you have a custom application that you use and you don't want to just have a separate place for people to go to, run reports, et cetera, can you embed Power BI reports and dashboards and different things into a website? So you can actually do that. If you have your own custom app or website, you can basically use that. I haven't done that, but I've seen it done. But it's not hard. And yeah, that's something that we're exploring as well for our internal application. So that's something that we'll be providing as well. So kind of to almost finish up here, the future and roadmap of Microsoft BI is for tight integration and enhancements to a lot of these services that I've showed you today. So from that standpoint, Microsoft believes in, obviously everyone can't move to the cloud, and obviously those in the cloud might still have a hybrid environment of things on-prem. So Microsoft is making it easier for those two types of environments to be able to talk to each other. And that's where I continuously see in the roadmap. But I see people, especially with dealing with big data and needing quick turnarounds on things, I see the industry going more towards software as a server, a serverless architecture, which are using a lot of these cloud applications to do their BI work. But you can, like I said, you can easily go into reporting services and integrate that. You can use, obviously, you can use Power BI Report Server. I think there's a capability. I spoke at Past Summit this past November in 2018, and in the keynote they were talking about so Power BI Report Server is the on-prem that allows paginated reports from SSRS and Power BI to exist together. Well, in PowerBI.com, you can still only deploy Power BI reports, but not SSRS reports. They're actually making a capability for that as well. So you're seeing a lot of, cross-platform, being able to talk to each other. So now to kind of jump into the demo, one of the things that I like to preface with this is, I think where I like to focus the demo is understanding the capabilities of Power BI, obviously, but then where you can get into trouble. So where I've seen a lot of scenarios is when you just basically turn your Power BI implementation loose to report users and developers who are not developers, but they are developers because they're building reports and developing reports, but non-IT staff or non-IT managed individuals, because of quicker turnarounds for your business users to just be able to drag and drop and create things that they need instead of putting in service requests for IT. Well, what ends up happening is you start to have overlap of data, you start to have a limited granularity, and you start to not have scalability, and then you end up with, hundreds or, 50, 60, 70, however many reports, and then some don't get used, some do get used. Some pull from different data sources and might overlap, and you don't have that full conglomerate of architecture behind the Power BI report. So it's a nice visualization and it looks great, but it's not architected well on the back end. So what I want to show you first, and forgive me if anyone on the call is and this probably is bad timing because I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan and there's a lot of controversy around that. So I apologize, but this is where I've built my demos at. So I'm looking at the Steelers 2016 passing offense. What you can see from this is I have KPI values. So I'm looking at a league average overall. And what this is telling me is in total yards, touchdowns, and completion percentages of passing offense in 2016, did the Pittsburgh Steelers meet the mark above the average of all 32 teams? I can see that here. So that tells me that question. Then this basically tells me from the green line perspective where the average is and then where different teams sit. So pretty easy report. Nice visualizations. And you might say, well, why are these blank? Because if I wanted to, I can look here and I can say Pittsburgh Steelers were right here at 4,202 total yards. And then I would have to say, what about since Baltimore's in their division? If I wanted to look at Baltimore, I have to scroll over here and say, oh, they're at 4,100 and make that comparison. But if I wanted to just isolate those two teams, I built visualizations to do that. And so my visualizations to do that, if I select the Baltimore Ravens, I have to have a team selected. I can see a side-by-side comparison that actually shows the team yards versus the opponent versus the average, touchdowns, and completion percentages. So I can actually compare teams. So this dashboard is pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. But the problem with this is, as you can see, I'm only limited to 2016. There's no slicer or anything in here that will allow me to pick a different year. I can't pick a different team other than to compare the Steelers to that team if I wanted to actually choose a different team here. So I don't have that flexibility. And where I got this from, let me just kind of step through this really quickly. This visualization actually shows me the table. This is one table, so you can see here, and it just has a summary of yards, etc. It's a very summarized table. So I can't drill down to each game. This is just all games in 2016. So there's a lot of limitation in this granularity here. So if I go here to my data modeling section, you can see here's all of the fields that I've created. What you can also see, if you can see here, there are what's called, these are calculated columns. So those are just columns that I've literally created once I imported that weren't in my spreadsheet or text file that I've imported this. So I've just done a new column and then added whatever value. And because I'm comparing everybody to Steelers, I've manipulated my data to create the Steelers comparison for every row of every team here to compare that data. So I had to do some data manipulation here. So again, that's where my limitation is. If we wanted to see here what my query looks like, I don't have the text file located. I've imported and I've removed it. But if we go here, this will actually show me here with the path that I accessed it. It was a CSV document, et cetera, et cetera. It's comma delimited, so you can connect to a lot of different things. So say I had an end user create that report, and then someone else said, well, hey, I want to look at, the Atlanta Falcons. So you might have had another end user or report developer create that. So that might look fairly similar, right? So if we look at that, so this is more of, a white background here, but here I can see the same kind of scenario. I can see the same trending, just different color schemes, and I can click on it and show comparisons. But again, now I'm looking at 2017. So you would have to create, if you theoretically look at this, you would have to create, 32 different reports in order to click on and show, and you'd have to link those reports somehow in order to scale this. If we want to look at this, this is actually from a file as well that I downloaded, same kind of setup, same kind of scenario. So that's just doing double work at this point. So then, say I wanted to look at stats, full stats, right, of 2017 top receivers. And I just created this report to show the capabilities of Power BI and connecting the data sources. So if I go here, you can see this is a little different. So I actually go down to a player level and not the team level that I can extract data from. Again, one data set. And if I go on to edit queries and I look at advanced editor, this is actually connecting to NFL.com. So this actually connected here and pulled this data in. So this is extremely capable. At Power BI, you can even hit, HTML in a website and pull data. Now, again, there's another limitation. I have filters up here. So the question would be, okay, well, how would I be able to build a report like this? And I'm more speaking from the standpoint of advanced BI, when you're starting to talk about the Internet of Things and pulling data from different places. Like maybe you're a stock firm and you need to pull data for different stocks and different things. Maybe you get feeds from NASDAQ and different things that might supply you Excel files or CSV files, and you ingest them into your database and you create your own database. So it's like, what's the capabilities? That's the easier way to do it than to just hit this. This is easier to do, but it's limited. So the other thing is, if I had a series of players, right, how would I be able to scroll through and click next automatically to pull this or change this automatically? That would be a lot of spreadsheets that I would have to create and download, or I would have to make multiple data set connections based upon all of the different filters in the URL. So this is where you start getting into really needing to integrate analysis or integration services, potentially analysis services, because you're going to start dealing with a larger amount of data. So stepping into that aspect, and just to show you, and I'll get into some features and functionality of Power BI, is I've created this dashboard. So this dashboard is a lot more intense. So you can see team offensive stats. I can select by a team. So I can click here, and if I only wanted to select Arizona Cardinals, I could do that. All my visualizations change. You can see I only limited to here. Now, this does a top teams and rush yards. I've only selected one, so it's just going to show me one. So this visualization is not really there for the drill down filtering, but you can see here that this also gave me the top 100 players in yards, touchdowns, and receptions for that team. So it filtered down to a player. So the other aspect of this is I can choose a different year. So I've loaded years in here from 2000 to 2018. So there's 18 years worth of data in here versus some of those other reports that were more extremely limited. I can also, if I didn't want to do top 10, I could do top 5, and actually show that. So before I get into some other functionalities that I've done here, you can also see here that I have multiple tables. So with that being said, that brings me over to my database level, right? So my database level here, I actually have an NFL database, but I went through a stage, an NFL, and then a DW. So here I have all of this data in these tables that are related. So this is where building a data warehouse with analysis services, integrating that data with an integration services kind of brings this all together and keeps your data better governed and useful and more scalable. So you may ask, well, how did you automate the process of going through pages, et cetera, et cetera? So what I did is I have an SSIS package that can use Power Query, because it's just using Power Query to navigate to a URL. And I've basically had it loop through a week at a time. So for example, if you take a look at the playoffs that's coming up this weekend, if I needed to, I know they're over on Sunday, so I can set up a scheduled job to go out and write JSON and Power Query code to pull this data down in an automated fashion and load it to my table and then transform it. So that's essentially what I've done. Now, yes, that's a longer development process and takes some skill set, but I get more out of my report with that. So now I have the ability, if I want to drill down, for example, so again, let's just choose a different team. So let's choose Baltimore Ravens. I can click here now and I can drill through to my team's dashboard. So in my team's dashboard, this might look a little similar to one of the other dashboards. So maybe I just want to say, okay, I want to see everybody. So here's where I have a bookmark. If you go to view, bookmarks, and selection pane, here's my different bookmarks, so I can clear. So I filter down based upon a team. So what happens if I'm like, okay, well, I don't want that team, I need to go back out of this. I can either hit the back button by hitting Control and going back here, and then not selecting a team, and it's going to the tab, right? Even though it's still there. But if I hit clear selected, it'll just take me back to all of my cleared selections of filters. So cleared selected now brings me back everything. So now I can filter by teams here. If I wanted to do the Steelers again, here's the Steelers. If I wanted to look at them against an opponent, I can do that and select an opponent here, etc. So again, I'm able to do that. Now you might say, okay, what if I want to get on the player stats? Because I'm looking at receiving to team. I've went from a whole conglomerate of a Power BI report of overall offensive statistics, and then I came down to team stats. What if I want to go into a player? So say I wanted to go into, a player here, and we'll choose someone other than Antonio Brown because he's in the news. And we'll choose, let's just say, Antoine Randall. So if I click on this, right click, I can drill through to my other dashboard. And now I can actually look at him, and if I wanted to predict fantasy points, this is just what I'm using my dashboard for. I can actually look at the game site, if it was home or if it was away. And so I can blow this up. Let me get some of these off of here. And let me take the grid off. So I can look at, he averages about 2 catches a game, almost 3. 33 yards a game and he doesn't really get many touchdowns, but on average, he might give me 6.54 fantasy points, right? And this is his career stats. I can select a specific team that that's his team. I can select an opponent team if I know that if I had him on my fantasy and the Steelers are playing a different team, I can select that. I can also look at if the game is home or away, what kind of statistics he had there, and I can also look at a tabular form as well. So this is, and then again, I can clear select it here. So if I click, and this is using the bookmark technology. So if I click here, now this is just basically everybody. And if I go back to my previous report, let's just say I click on Antonio Brown because I just wanted to show something else in here. He actually has a photo, so I can show his photo as well. And I can say, okay, he gives me a better chance, this week because he might give me 18.15 on average based upon basically 8 years worth of data. And so that's essentially with those other reports, I wasn't able to get that. So I had to do a little bit of legwork with some of the other tool sets, mainly SSIS, to conform this data and then bring it into here. And then when you look at that from a data model standpoint, this is way more intricate. So this would be like your data warehouse that you can actually, this isn't even fed into analysis services yet. I plan on working on that portion of it, but this is what that relationship would look like. So I can build, that was only for receiving stats. So I provided a ton of insight for if I was, just a person using this for fantasy, or if it was an NFL team, this is maybe a report that someone might use like, on ESPN or something like that. And I know they use reports like this. So this is, again, a fun example. You can pertain this to any data that you want. It doesn't have to be NFL stats. It can be sales information. It can be banking information, account information. It can be anything that pertains to your business. I just wanted to show something that wasn't necessarily customer centric because, we can't show customers data. So I had to create something that made it a little fun to show the capability and the extensions of Power BI.